We're bringing you boots on the ground insight from the ranchers, conservationists, and partners who are helping to preserve the best of the Golden State for generations to come. Join the California Rangeland Trust for inspiring stories of resilience, innovation, and hope as we get tuned into the land.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tune Into the Land. I am your host and CEO of the California Rangeland Trust, Michael Delbar. Last month, we explored the Farm to Fork movement with Patrick and Bobbin Mulvaney, discussing the importance of knowing where our food comes from and the people who grow it. Building on that theme, this episode highlights a family dedicated to producing food and stewarding the land. Yolo Land and Cattle Company is a multi-generational ranch owned and operated by the Stone family. Nestled in the western hills of Yolo County, their ranch is a familiar sight to travelers along 505 and I-5. For 5 generations, the Stones have worked tirelessly to sustain this landscape, ensuring its health as a working ranch and a vibrant business. Today, we are joined by 2 of the individuals at the helm of this operation, Scott and Karen Stone. The Stones, alongside their family, have continually adapted their practices, embracing innovation to keep their operations viable and resilient. In 2005, they conserved their 7,500-acre ranch with the California Rangeland Trust, becoming champions for conservation. In this episode, we dig into their operations at Yolo Land and Cattle Company, the family's decision to conserve, and their vision for the future generations who will care for the land. So with that, I'd like to welcome Scott and Karen to the podcast. Scott, Karen, thank you for joining us today. Give us a little history of Yolo Land and Cattle. How did your family get into the ranching business?
Well, Michael, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Karen and I are awfully glad to come and talk with you a little bit about what we do on the west side of the Sacramento Valley. So my father and his partner started ranching in 1976. They had a fairly sizable operation that they'd built up. It originally came out of kind of a farming operation, then moved into a cattle operation. They purchased our home ranch in 1976, and that's when they started Yolo Land and Cattle Company. They ran together for about 7 years, and then they split up the partnership. And so we ended up with the main part of the ranch, which was about just under 9,000 acres at the time. And we had a cow-calf operation. We didn't run a lot of stockers back in those days. And the cattle would come out of those hills where they would spend the fall and winter months. And then in the spring, they'd come down to our irrigated pasture ranches. We're down in the valley. And one of the things my dad and his partner did is they built a tomato cannery in the Dixon area on the south side of Interstate 80 back in those early 70s. And they set it up so they used what they call the rinse water, or the wastewater from the cannery, which was 4 to 5 million gallons of water a day during the canning season, and it would irrigate about 400 acres of irrigated pasture. And so those cattle would spend half the year up in the hills and half the year down on the irrigated pasture ranches. And so over the years, that has morphed into kind of what our current operation is today. Our home ranch consists of about 7,500 acres, and that's on the west side of the Sacramento Valley between the towns of Madison and Winters, up in what they call the Blue Ridge. We range from 300-foot elevation up to 2,300-foot elevation. We lease some other ranches that are close by. One of our landlords is the Rominger family out of Winters, which also has a conservation easement with the California Rangeland Trust. We also have some ranches that we lease adjacent to the south and east sides of Travis Air Force Base down in Fairfield. And those are winter ranches that we run some of our stockers on. And then we have our base ranch of irrigated pastures down in the bypass south of Davis, between Davis and Sacramento. And there's about 700 acres of irrigated pastures there that we were able to take the cattle down during the summer and fall months. And we'll occasionally send some cattle to some mountain ranches. We'll send 3 or 4 loads of our spring pairs either over into the Carson Valley or up in Northern California for spring, for the spring cattle for the summer feed.
Well, that main ranch is absolutely gorgeous. You were gracious hosts for our 25th anniversary gala last year. And it was it's such a beautiful place, and you have really worked to diversify that operation. Tell us a little bit about the different aspects of the ranch besides just raising cattle. Your brother Casey and wife Angela are involved in the operation. You have the grass-fed beef side of things. You've got the jerky events. Tell us a little bit more how you've really capitalized on all the beauty of that ranch.
Well, we're just trying to eke out a living, as I like to tell my friends in the cattle business. But it kind of all started back in 1995 when I went to Stan Parsons Ranching for Profit School out in Montana, and just opened my eyes to a lot of different things and different ways of looking at what we could do with the resources that we have. And every ranch in California and every ranch in the United States, whether it's a 5-acre ranch or a 5,000-acre ranch, they're all different. And so you have to work with the resources that God has given you on those ranches and try to do the best that you can and make the most of what you have to work with. And so when I came back from the Ranching for Profit School, it was pretty interesting with the family dynamics, because I came home speaking Russian and they all spoke Chinese. So trying to get everybody speaking the same language and getting everybody on the same page, start moving some things forward and look at the ranch in different ways was quite an adventure for a while. And my father, who was a tremendous cattleman, it's a father-son deal where you're butting heads for a long time. But finally he came around and we got some really good things done. So we started looking at different ways and different enterprises that we could utilize to benefit our operation from an income standpoint, a quality of life standpoint, a better place that we could develop for the livestock that's on the ranch, the employees that work for us on the ranch, the wildlife on the ranch. And so we started setting up these different entities. One of them is Karen and I have been for the last 16 years doing a grass-finished beef operation where we sell our animals direct to consumers through, it's basically off of the internet website that we have. We did do the Davis Farmers Market for 7 years, which is 350 Saturdays out of your life. It's really fun. And it was nice meeting and visiting with people. Everybody would come and ask about the ranch, and they'd buy a couple pounds of steaks and a couple pounds of hamburger. And we have to sell the whole animal from the tail to the eyeballs. So we had to change our ways of marketing in order to keep going and doing that. So we changed to where we just started selling quarter animals, which are carcasses, which is cut and wrapped, vacuum sealed and frozen. And we would sell a quarter, which was anywhere from 100 to 125 pounds of finished beef. And it's the same price for the whole quarter, but you get every cut on the animal. So you're paying more for your hamburger, but you're paying an awful lot less for the steaks and some of the quality cuts. So we've been doing that. We just had about 3 weeks ago, we did our first ever customer appreciation barbecue at the ranch. We had about 85 customers come out. My band played, and we cooked our barbecued grass-finished hamburgers, and everybody had a great time. My brother Casey and his wife Angie, about 10 years ago, started in the beef jerky business. And so they have a line of beef jerky. They work with a company in Sacramento that makes, and a company in Redding that makes the jerky with our label, and they sell that at stores all over Northern California. We do some events at the ranch. Unfortunately, our main barn that we host most of the events on, the wind tore the roof off this spring. So we've got quite a bit of repair work to do this winter, next spring, to get that barn back to where we need to have it. We also have been approached, about 6 years ago, we were approached by a drone company called Zipline International. They were based out of Half Moon Bay, and they supply emergency blood and medical supplies to rural hospitals in Africa. And we were very interested in what they had to say. So we went down and met with them they had a 250 acre ranch in Half Moon Bay that they were test flying some drones on. And we ended up signing a lease with them, and we leased them 2 acres in the middle of the ranch, where they set up a nest site, and we leased them the airspace over our ranch. And now they've been there for 6 years. They've been great tenants. These drones that they started with, it's an 11-foot wingspan, has a 4-pound payload, has about a 50 to 60 mile radius. And these rural hospitals in Africa will used to take 2 to 5 hours to get the emergency blood and medical supplies to. The doctor will now take his cell phone, he'll call in an order, and they'll fly these drones out there. They can be at these hospitals in 20 to 40 minutes. They circle the hospital. They have a 5-foot paper parachute that drops the payload or the blood or emergency medical supplies right to the doorstep of the hospital. So they've saved thousands and thousands of lives. They've been keeping track of how many lives they've saved out there. I don't know, it's somewhere 15 to 20,000.
Wow. Tens of thousands.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. The technology that they're utilizing is amazing. So the future is here. The Jetsons are here. It's pretty phenomenal stuff, and they are doing some just amazing things with it. And we really like the humanitarian side of what they're doing. And they're also working with some ranchers in Africa or livestock people in Africa, where they're able to also deliver emergency vaccination materials to the different producers. So that has been really good. Having different entities like this within the overall operation is financially pretty darn good. The more income you can have on your ranch from different sources that do not negatively affect what you're trying to achieve with your ranch is really good to have.
One way you, in a sense, diversified the income stream, but in reality, it was just to protect what you have out there in that beautiful operation and that ranch. It was the conservation easement. So Karen, what did that conversation look like as you were pondering whether or not to do an easement on the ranch?
Well, before we met CRT, just to back up a little bit, before we met CRT, Scott's dad received an unsolicited offer on the ranch by a gentleman actually up in Alaska that owned an Alaskan fishing fleet. And he wanted to buy 1,200 acres of the ranch for $12 million. He said he wanted to put in a couple of hotels and a couple of golf courses. He said it was cheaper for people to fly from Japan at that time out here, stay and golf and fly back than it was to golf in Japan, if you could even find places to golf in Japan back then. This was 2001, 2002. And at that time, Scott and I were young, our kids were young. $12 million was something to consider. It was like, that's a lot of money. And so it really made you think. Casey, Scott's younger brother, was still in college. And we had to really think deeply, because $12 million could have changed our life in a completely different way. I mean, we could have we probably would have ended up selling the whole ranch, because I don't know how we would have functioned as cattle ranchers next to all of that. And it could have just changed the whole trajectory of our lives at that time. And we decided that we should consider it. And so by considering it, we drove up into Oregon, Northern California. We went and looked at some ranches and came back and sat around the table, had some very deep conversations about, what will we do with this money? Do we want to continue to be a ranching family? This ranch is Scott's dad's legacy that he's left for his kids and hopefully his grandkids. And what does that mean to us? This is our community. Scott grew up here. Scott was on every board in the county. His dad was on every other board in the county. And we were, this was where we lived. But again, $12 million was $12 million. And so in the end, after a lot of consideration, a lot of conversation with Casey as well, I've said it before, it just came down to the money just wasn't worth our passion for what we believed in and what we wanted to continue to do with our life, and continue the legacy that his dad, wanted us to all have. And thank God, we made that decision. I couldn't imagine if we just took the money and tried to go in a different direction. I don't think it would have worked out for us. And so that was kind of when I think we all just, realized how deep the passion and the love for the land and the ranch was for all of us. To give up $12 million was a lot. And then it was probably 2 years after that Scott met CRT and started getting involved and learning about the conservation easement and what, the impact that would have on the ranch and our family. And again, upholding the legacy of his dad and knowing that we would be conserving that ranch in perpetuity and that it will always stay like that. And it makes you want to go out there every day and just keep making that land better, because this is how it's always going to stay. I think if the ranch wasn't in an easement and you always had that thought that at any given time something could happen where you needed to sell off a piece, or that's what you chose to do, there's always that in the back of your mind that there's the potential that you may not have this, or it may not be this big piece of land in one big chunk. And so after the easement was put on the ranch, it helped us, financially. We made some really good decisions to, invest that money so that we knew that when we have lean times, we have a little bit of capital in another spot that we could depend on. And then we also were able to take that money and make some improvements that we weren't able to do before. And just giving our family that security of knowing that this ranch and all the effort that we put into it day after day, and especially my husband, who has been just amazing at all his conservation efforts and his environmental efforts into that ranch, that we're doing it for the love of our family, the love of cattle ranching, and the love of that land. And I think that's what made us do it. And our family still feels that way. It's, every day I go out to the ranch and I always roll the window down. Doesn't matter if it's raining or snowing or whatever's happening. And I just say, thank you, God, that I get another day up here. He gets up every day and goes to that ranch, never thinking about the financial aspect of it. He goes to that ranch every day thinking about improving that ranch, just making it better every day for the cattle that are there, for our wildlife, for our life there. And it's a beautiful way to live. It just gives you a path that's so clean and real. You just never have to think about the what ifs. So having that easement just gave us that opportunity to not have to think about that, to just be a ranching family. And that's our life. And that's what we work towards every day.
So no regrets.
Absolutely no regrets. Absolutely no regrets.
So what comes to mind when you're thinking about the next generation? These steps that you've taken, the love that you put into that land and into this operation, what's the next generation look like for you?
Well, I'll just speak real quickly. So my daughter-in-law just sent me a little video of our grandson driving, sitting on Austin's lap, driving the side by side, and he's just, he's steering, right? But he's looking, he's just looking all around, and it's just, the joy of seeing that, and the memories that I have of stacking pillows all around our kids, making them sit on pillows, putting pillows behind them so that they could reach the pedals of the hay truck. It's like, okay, just drive straight. That's all you have to do. They're like 10 years old, but you're desperate. Somebody has to drive the hay truck in the mud. And I just think about the life that our kids have had. And I think about our boys, the depth in them. And especially when they're around their friends, like they grew up in Davis, and they were, I think, the only ranching family in that whole school, that they went to. And every year we would bring the kids out as a field trip. And it was absolutely the most popular field trip of the whole school. The parents would come. They would bring all of their kids. And I just think that I look at my kids and, these are all wonderful boys that are their friends and stuff, but I see a big difference in the way that they grew up. And our kids are very well-rounded. They're very deep in a lot of conversations. There's a lot of depth to them and emotion. And then they're super confident about being in the outdoors and what they can do. And, and their friends have learned over the years by coming and being with them. But I just think to myself, it's so important that we have those differences in our kids and our personalities. It's what makes the world go around. I mean, if we were all the same growing up in the city and never having that diversity of, living on the land and around animals and that appreciation, we'd just be so homogenized and all the same. There would never be diverse thinking and the world would be much smaller. So it's so important, I think, and it brings me so much joy to see our little grandson out there having such a great time on the ranch and just fulfilled with the animals and the dirt, getting in the dirt and driving the vehicles. And it's incredibly important. And I'll let Scott talk about Austin, our oldest son, who's come back to work with us. And he works side by side with Austin, which is very similar to Scott. When he came back to the ranch, he worked hip to hip with his father until the day his dad died. And I think seeing Austin now come back to work with Scott, it's, they have their tug of wars now and then, mostly because Dad's having a hard time letting loose of the reins a little, but but I'll let Scott talk about the joy from him having his son work alongside of him.
So we are blessed that our oldest son, Austin, did come back to the ranch about a year ago. And it's certainly such a dynamic environment out there. You kind of have to be a master of a lot of trades to make it work in the cattle business. And so when he came back to the ranch, he also purchased a new excavator and started his own equipment company. And he was in his 30s, and probably one of the worst things a parent could do for their child is to have them get out of college or high school and come straight to work on your family ranch. It sounds good in theory, but children need to go out on their own. When they graduate from high school or college, they need to go work for other people, see what works, what doesn't work, what are the great ways to handle people and livestock and businesses, and then at some point in time, bring that knowledge back to the family ranch. And so we are in that situation now. It's great to have him back. He's the fifth generation in our family. His son and daughter are the sixth generation for our family in California. So we're pretty excited about that. We've got a long lineage of agricultural history in our family. But it's really good to have him back working with us. And it's hard to slow the train down, because when you're having fun and things are going in the right direction, you want to keep your foot to the pedal most of the time. But we're getting to the point where, I'd kind of like to start slowing things down, which is easier said than done. But when you're working on things and having fun and everything's going the right direction, it's sometimes it's hard to slow down.
I think the one common thing that you'll hear from a lot of ranchers that own, a big piece of land, like Yolo land and cattle, is that you don't really feel like you own it. Every day when you go out there, you're there because you have a responsibility. And that's how we feel every day. We have a responsibility to raising healthy, sustainable food for our country, for the world. We have a responsibility to our community through the easement, where we have now protected this amazing view shed for them. When people in our community look out at these incredible sunsets that we have, they're looking out over the Blue Ridge, which is part of our ranch. And I think if you had a group of ranchers sitting around this table, I think they would all agree that we're responsible. We're responsible for all the wildlife that live up there. We're responsible for the watersheds that go through our ranch and end up into the Delta. And by putting the conservation easement on it, it just it brings all of that full circle for us. And like I mentioned before, it just takes that what if away from us. And that responsibility is the same every day. We never fear about the ranch ever changing in that way. Well, of course, we could sell the ranch, the whole ranch. But even if we did, the ranch is still going to remain that open, amazing landscape. And so I think it's a responsibility that we all have taken on. It certainly isn't for financial reasons. That's not why we do it. Most ranchers have a second income somewhere.
Or third. And it's getting to that point. And, that's why we told our son, look, we can't afford to pay you what you're worth and afford to pay you what you need to have a growing family. And so like us, Scott and I, we have our own real estate company. And so that was kind of the extra money that we had for us to grow ourselves, and to be able to use that money to, for things at the ranch if we needed it. But so we told Austin that, you're going to have to find some other side job as well as ranching that can provide an income for you if this is truly what you want to do. Because if you don't, you can go out into the world. I mean, he's college educated and, speaks fluent. He has all kinds of certificates and degrees, and, he could go out into the world and do whatever he wants, and I'm sure make a really nice wage, but he's committed. And I love when our family sits around out there and we're all together and it's just peaceful and quiet. And I think we all feel that same feeling, that it's not like you own the ranch. It's just like you're here as a protector, that, like I said, it's your responsibility. It's a responsibility to the land and to the next generation.
One of the things I didn't think about is that, the next legacy is our legacy to our kids, and Casey and Angie's legacy to their kids. And that's what the ranch is, the legacy that we're leaving, and Casey and Angie are leaving to their kids. And their kids are younger than ours. They are, they're just out of college and doing a few different things right now in their life, but they love coming to the brandings and helping us. And Carson, our younger son, is still living the dream in sunny Santa Barbara. And he'll call on the phone and he goes, I just miss home so much. I hate missing out on the brandings. I hate missing out on the activities at the ranch. You know, the stories that I hear. He's like, I wish I was home. He's not ready to do that yet. He has a lot going on down in Santa Barbara, but we do always bring our kids in on the phone together when we're having conversations about the ranch and making decisions about, you know, activities that we're going to do if it's something big. And Casey and Angie, you know, like I said, their kids are involved more about, you know, coming to our brandings and things like that. But as they're getting older, you know, we want to start including them as well, because again, you know, this will be the legacy that we'll be leaving to them. And it's important. And I think by bringing them all in and having them a part of the ranch, it keeps them learning about it. Just like, you know, I didn't know anything about ranching when I met Scott. I knew about horses, and that was my contribution to the ranch when I first came. I really knew nothing about cattle other than at Cal Poly. I was on a couple of the feedlot projects, and then I worked at the veterinary hospital on campus the whole time I was there. But, you know, being on a ranch and being a part of all of that activity, I had to learn by doing, for sure. It was not, you know, where I came from. And so our kids, it's where they've come from. And so I just hope that by always including them, that, you know, the more knowledge they have, the more power they have, the more they feel a part of the ranch and will want to continue with their own legacy, you know, for their kids. And we have a little grandson and a granddaughter now. And so that's super cool to see Wyatt running around on the ranch, filthy dirty, and chasing the dogs. And, you know, he's not swinging a rope yet, but I'm sure that will be coming. So, yeah, I mean, as ranchers, I think probably every rancher you talk to, they talk about the generations and the legacies and just how fun it is to be able to be in an environment where you can work side by side with your kids. When Austin and I and Carson are all out roping together and, you know, we catch together head and heel, it's, you know, my heart just pounds being there with my kids, being able to do that.
That's pretty special.
It's very special.
It is so rewarding, other than, you know, as you said, that you're producing food and fiber, but you're producing so much more, both on that land and then the land is producing for you. We were fortunate enough to hear you and Scott, Karen, speak at an event last week in San Diego. And at that, you told a story about a young man that spent some time on the ranch. Mm-hmm. That story, if you could tell us again for our listeners, really showed those other benefits and the other rewards that the land provides. So
last year, and he still works for us, wonderful young man. But last year, he came and worked for us, started working for us. And unfortunately, his mom, you know, had a terminal illness. And I don't believe that he had ever been out on the open land like that. And we were out at the ranch one day and he was helping me do something. And I had asked him how his mom was doing. And he had shared with me that his mom had passed away 3 days ago. And, you know, I let him, you know, we talked about that. And I let him know that, you know, he didn't have to be here. And I was so sorry that he felt that he had to come to work. And he said to me, Mrs. Stone, he said, if it's okay with you, he said, I'd like to keep coming here. He said, I don't know what it is about being out here on this ranch and around these horses, but it has saved me. And he said, I don't know where I'd be right now if I didn't have this ranch to come to. And it just made me think, you know, here's this young man that knows nothing about the land and how healing it is and how therapeutic horses are. And, this was just from his heart, but what he did know is how wounded his heart was at that time, and that the land had saved him, in his words. And I just thought to myself, all the money in the world cannot invent that, and all the money in the world cannot buy that. That's a real story.
Your passion, both of you, in that land and what you do, and as Karen, you mentioned, Scott served on many boards in the county, following, his father did as well. Scott, you joined the Rangeland Trust Board in 2002, I believe it was, and served to probably about 2015, including 2 years as the chair of the board in 12 and 13. You took that passion on the land and brought that to the organization. What drew you to be so involved and passionate about the Rangeland Trust?
Well, my good friend Daryl Wood talked me into joining the board back in the day, and I had done a little bit of research. It was a pretty young organization, 3 or 4 years old, but I liked what they were trying to achieve. I liked what they stood for. I was at the time doing some work for Yolo, the county of Yolo, and also the city of Davis on some open space and Swainsontalk conservation easements on farm ground. So I did have some background into easements, and we started getting interested in possibly doing something at the ranch, and really the Rangeland Trust, even though it was a beginning organization, was the best vehicle to achieve what we wanted to achieve in saving the ranch and getting it permanently protected. And so I think I was on the Rangeland Trust board for a total of, I want to say 17 years, past director, made some lifelong friends through some of the other board members, and have just seen the organization grow and flourish and do just some phenomenal things. And it's anytime you have a much greater demand, which never goes away, than you can satisfy, it's just a great position to be in. It's a tough position to be in, because it's kind of like you going to the pound and wanting to take home all the dogs in the pound. You do the best you can with the resources that you have to work with to try to accomplish as many things as you can. But it takes time to get these easements done. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a great team of people, between attorneys and accountants and family members and CRT staff and teams they put together. It's not an easy process, and it's not a fast process, but it's certainly worth it. And so I could see that working with us on our family deal. I could see it happening on other family ranches, and it gets you energized and want to help out as much as you can in that regard.
Where do you want to see the organization go?
Well, obviously, I'd like to see you hit the 1 million acre mark in the state of California, which is probably going to happen at some point in time. That's probably a long-term goal. But it's interesting because many, many people really like the Western way of life, and it's just not ranchers that like the Western way of life. And so the general public, when people actually come out to a ranch and listen and hear how we do things and why we do things, what we do with our properties, what we don't do with our properties, people just love being out there. They love being a part of it any way they can. And so it's great to have the support of just regular folks that like the Western way of life, like the open space, like the things that the CRT is doing as far as conserving these lands throughout the state.
Well, the success of the Rangeland Trust is due to our landowner partners like you two and your families. The trust that you put into us to help us help you conserve it. You've conserved that land. We talk about the acres that Rangeland Trust has conserved, but we didn't do it. We facilitated it. It's you, the landowners, who made that happen. So thank you for all of that support and dedication to your operations and to our organization.
Thank you, Michael.
So Scott and Karen, thank you so much for spending some of your time with us and our listeners and learning more about your operation. And you're right, Karen, all the work that you all are doing, you just can't see that from the road. We hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode of Tune Into the Land with the Stone family. Be sure to tune back in on World Soil Day, December 5th, for part 2 of this conversation. Together, Scott and Karen dig more into some of the management practices the family has incorporated to prioritize soil health on their land. This closes the gate on another episode. If you like what you're hearing, leave us a review and comment. We want to hear from you. Also, be sure to hit that follow button so you'll be notified when part 2 of this episode is released. Thanks for listening.